Hey guys, it's Sam. And today I wanted to talk about whether or not there is a right way to play D&D. I mean, really any role-playing game, but specifically Dungeons & Dragons. Because I saw a video from Ivan Mike 1968 yesterday. It may have been one of his more recent ones. I can't remember. But basically, he was talking about how he sees recently that a lot of people who are playing D&D, especially the more modern editions like 5th edition, really make an attempt to have like an immersive role-playing experience, and that's not necessarily supported by the mechanics of the game. And I'm paraphrasing there, and Ivan, if you watch this video and that was incorrect, please go ahead and correct me on that, because I do apologize if I misquoted you there. But that was the gist of it that I understood anyway, was that there was some sort of correct way to play D&D. Now, he wasn't suggesting that it was bad to do that by any means, but he was saying that, I believe, that D&D doesn't necessarily support that type of gaming with the mechanics involved. And I thought that was interesting because, to me, that's always the way that I have attempted to play Dungeons & Dragons. But I also didn't start out playing Dungeons & Dragons. You know, my role-playing experience was informed by the White Wolf Storyteller system. So for me, I had always assumed that role-playing was very heavily character-based and a more narrative, immersive type of experience, right? But it makes me wonder, for those that were playing in, you know, the late 70s, early 80s, 90s, whatever, playing Dungeons & Dragons specifically, you know, starting with the earliest editions, going up through AD&D, 2nd edition, was it because of the nature of the system, the fact that it focuses heavily on combat, the fact that it rewards sort of tactical thinking and whatever, is it more of a simulationist game, and did people play it that way? And then I guess the second question is, did that change with 3rd edition, 4th edition, Pathfinder, 5th edition? You know, did the designers intentionally try to change that? So I'm curious. I mean, anybody who was around, you know, for the beginning of Dungeons & Dragons, who played it back then, I would love to have your take on this, because I don't, you know, I'm of a generation that was not playing the earliest editions. You know, I didn't discover D&D until 3rd edition came out. And like I said, I didn't even start with it. So by the time I was playing it, I was actually playing 3.5. So there's that. But what was really interesting to me was he was talking about how he thinks sometimes people are playing the wrong game. You know, like if you're looking for that immersive role-playing experience, is Dungeons & Dragons the best system for you to use? So I don't know. I mean, but it was curious, and it really got me thinking, because I lately have been very unsatisfied with modern D&D. And I've been trying to put my finger on why that's the case, you know, because right now it's sort of this nebulous, like, I don't know why I don't necessarily like it, but I have a very hard time enjoying playing 5th edition D&D. I like running it all right. I mean, it's fun enough to run, but I don't know. I don't enjoy the mechanics of that system. I feel like Ivan is correct in the sense that the mechanics don't necessarily support that type of role playing that I want to do. They don't necessarily get in the way either, but you know, it's hard. Hey, Scott. Yeah, so Scott says it's because it's slow. And that's true, but I don't know. I think it's a little more than that too, because I think, I don't know, D&D reminds me a lot of playing like Final Fantasy, right? Where it was turn-based and like, I don't know. I mean, parts of Final Fantasy were very fun, but man, I will tell you, like, watching one guy, you know, leap forward, make an attack, leap back, then the next person goes, leap forward, make an attack, or cast a spell, you know, like, oh God, that was so boring. And the other thing that I found is that it can be tricky, not always, but it can be tricky to have a really interesting and immersive combat that is fully fueled by the narration, right? Because what can happen is, if you're not careful about how you're narrating versus die rolling, you can end up in a bad situation, right? You can end up sort of narrating something and then the dice say otherwise, and now you have to sort of backpedal it. And that can mess with the immersion a little bit. Where I found, like with Dungeon World, for example, typically if you narrate something, fictional positioning is king in that game, right? So you can narrate something, and even if you roll on the dice a failure, you know, a 6-, that doesn't necessarily mean that that narration didn't happen the way you said it did. It just means that something else, some other complication happens as well, right? So it's interesting, you know, I'm wondering if there's something to that, right? I'm wondering if perhaps games are meant to be played a certain way, and that if you deviate from that, it's not necessarily that you won't have a good experience, and it's not necessarily that you're playing the game wrong, but would it make sense for you to try to find a system that is more indicative or conducive to your style of play, right? So like for me, I really enjoy the Fate system a lot because it's much more, its mechanics are built to facilitate narrative gameplay, right? It is not tactical. It is not turn-based. It isn't the combat simulator that D&D is. And again, that's not a bad thing. They're just different systems, right? But the narration fuels everything in Fate. It starts with the narration and ends with the narration, and the dice mechanic is there. In fact, all of the mechanics are there to enhance that narration. Where I think, and I might be wrong about this, and I fully admit that, but where I think with D&D, the game part of it comes first, right? The mechanics are such that there's a lot of rules and there's a lot of systems, and that you are supposed to engage with those systems in a certain specific way, right? So the game part is right up front, and the narration and the fiction is sort of on top of that. You know what I mean? At least that's been my experience with it. Whereas with other games, things like Fate, things like Cypher System, even to an extent, Star Wars RPG by Fantasy Flight, although that's very gamey as well. But that's enough. That's different enough because of the dice mechanic and the way that it's built to put that narration into everything that you do. Those games seem to, I don't know, they seem to do that a little bit differently. Mark Plord says D&D's tactical focus, sorry, let me see if I can get the comments back here, is legacy from its evolution from wargaming. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think that, is that okay, right? Like, is that supposed to be how you play it, right? Are you supposed to play D&D a little bit more like that tactical war game? I I mean, I would say you could play it however you want, right? But was the system designed to better facilitate that type of gameplay? And if so, theoretically, would you have a more enhanced experience, a better experience, if you played it that way? So I wonder about that. Scott says, I hear you, but GMing is daunting for many people. Now we are adding system finding. Tough ask. Yeah, sure. I mean, I get that. But at the same time, GMing is tough, but if you're fighting against a system to make it do what you want, that can be exhausting, right? That can be a battle in and of itself. And if you can avoid that, I don't know. And also, this day and age, I don't think that system finding is that tough of an ask. I think with the proliferation of gaming online, with things like Critical Role and, all of the YouTube and Twitch content creators running these different systems, I think that there is more access and more awareness than ever before of different systems. And thousands, if not, tens or hundreds of thousands of hours of examples of how to play differently and different systems and all that. So, yeah, but I also come from the GM side of things, so I always I will fully admit this bias. Everything I do is from a GM focused perspective. So Mark says, I think it speaks to how Gygax intended combat to work. From what I have heard, non-combat was always intended to be freeform. Totally. Yeah, I get that. But I think that it speaks to the intent of the game, that the combat mechanic is the central tenet of D&D, right? That it is the focus of the game, and that, especially in later editions, your character progresses because of your combat prowess, right? Because of how many monsters you kill. Earlier editions, it was treasure, but still, a lot of the time you had to fight to get that treasure. So, I don't know. Whereas I think in things like Cypher System and Dungeon World, when bad things happen to you, when you learn through failure, right? You learn through situations in which you make a mistake and you learn from that mistake, right? And Fate is more experience-based in the sense that, like, as you go through and you do these different things, as a starting highly competent character, you will just naturally learn and grow and change, right? And even with Star Wars, I mean, Star Wars, yes, is mission-based, but it is session-based. It is not based on... Well, and it's based on milestones and whatever, but it's not based on defeating enemies. So what do you guys think? I mean, is there a right and a wrong way to play a game system, right? Let's look at it in Cypher System. Is it wrong to try to play tactical-based combat in the Cypher System? I mean, I think that you will fight the system if you try to do that, right? It's not built to do that. So the question then becomes, does it make sense, if that's the type of game you want, to play it using the Cypher System, right? Same thing with Fate. I mean, you can do tactically based combat with Fate, but again, it's not built to do that, right? Dungeon World can also be tactical, but again, it's so narrative focused that what you're doing is it's frenetic. You're jumping back and forth. So, so I don't know. Yeah. And Mark says, so long as everybody's having fun, but to your point, it may not be the optimal system for your group. Yeah. And that's what it comes down to, right? Is that as long as everybody's having fun, you're playing correctly. So yeah, I totally agree with that. But yeah, it was just something I was musing on, something that I was thinking about, something that I thought was an interesting topic, was to whether or not system intent and the way that a system is designed is really how it should be played. Specifically relating to D&D 5th edition, it's funny because I've come from the perspective that I don't think D&D 5th edition would handle a dungeon crawl very well. I feel like it is not designed as such where the older editions were. But now that I'm coming to think of it, you know, and you know, hearing Ivan's perspective on it, it seems to me like maybe I was wrong in that assessment, that D&D is actually, all of its editions are based on dungeon crawling and combat focus, and that when you're doing a high immersive roleplay experience with that system, you're actually kind of playing against the system intent. And again, not necessarily in a bad way, but just it wasn't designed to facilitate that. So anyway, that's, you know, those are my thoughts. Not sure where I come down on this issue, but I would love to hear other people's perspectives on this, to see, you know, what you think, if that even makes sense, right? That there is a system design and that it should be followed, or if you're like, no, play whatever system you want, however you want. So anyway, let me know your thoughts. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave some comments. Comments are really helpful. It's not just for me, but for anybody else who might see this video. The purpose of these videos is to spur discussion and really to engage the community a little bit. So commenting on the video really helps. So anyway, I hope you guys are having fun, and happy gaming.